There is a silence between stars that most species never learn to hear. It is not the absence of sound, for space carries its own whispers through gravitational waves, through the ancient light of dying suns, through the electromagnetic echoes of civilizations long turned to dust. No, this silence is something deeper. It is the pause between heartbeats of the universe itself, the held breath of 10 trillion worlds waiting for something they cannot name. Valen Corthaxis had lived for 947 standard cycles, and in all that time he had never truly understood that silence. Until now. He stood at the observation deck of the refugee vessel Eternal Whisper, his four-jointed fingers pressed against the cold transparency of the viewport, watching the stars drift by with the terrible patience of eternity. Behind him, 7,000 survivors of the Aelthrani hegemony slept in stasis pods, their dreams filled with the burning of worlds they would never see again. Ahead of him, impossibly, lay Earth. Earth. The word felt strange, even in his thoughts, a primitive sound for a primitive world, or so he had believed for centuries. The Aelthrani had been charting stars when humans were still painting on cave walls. They had built their first interstellar gates while humanity was learning to forge bronze. For generations, the great councils had dismissed that small blue marble as an evolutionary curiosity, a planet of short-lived creatures who spent most of their existence killing each other over patches of dirt and abstract ideas. Dangerous, the archivists had written. Unstable. Territorial. Keep observation distance of no less than 40 light years. And now Valen was leading what remained of his people to beg for their mercy. The irony was not lost on him. First Consul. The voice came from behind him, soft, deferential, exhausted. Valen did not need to turn to know it was Mirith, his aide of 60 years, one of the few who had served him since before the collapse. "You should be resting," Valen said without turning from the viewport. "The medical officers tell me you haven't entered stasis in 11 cycles." "Neither have you, First Consul." A fair point. Valen's reflection in the viewport showed the toll clearly, the dulling of his silver-blue skin, the slight tremor in his secondary arms that betrayed cellular exhaustion, the hollowness around his 4 eyes that no amount of nutrient supplementation could hide. He looked old. He felt older. "I've been reviewing what we know of them," Mirith continued, moving to stand beside him. Her voice carried the careful neutrality of one delivering unpleasant information. "The humans." "And?" "The archives are incomplete. We stopped monitoring them closely after the quarantine edict of cycle 7842. There are fragments, scattered reports from the observational corps, some intercepted communications, a few images captured by long-range probes." She paused. "Most of it is centuries out of date." Valen finally turned to face her. "Tell me what we know. Not the official archives, what you've actually found." Mirith's secondary eyelids flickered, the Aelthrani equivalent of a nervous swallow. "They've changed, First Consul. In the 400 cycles since we last truly looked at them, they've changed significantly. They have faster-than-light capability now, crude compared to our gates, but functional. They've established colonies on 17 worlds. They've made contact with the Velothi Commerce Syndicate and the Dren Collective." "And?" "The Velothi tried to subjugate them. Trade war, economic pressure, the usual methods." Mirith's voice tightened almost imperceptibly. "The humans didn't just resist. They somehow convinced 40% of the Velothi merchant houses to defect.
Without firing a single shot, they collapsed an economic empire that had stood for 3,000 cycles.
Valen absorbed this in silence. The Velothi had been calculating, ruthless, ancient in their cunning. The idea that primitive humans had outmaneuvered them was troubling.
And the Dren? The Dren attempted military intimidation. They positioned a war fleet in the humans' outer territories. Standard dominance display. Myrith's voice dropped slightly. The humans responded by doing nothing.
Nothing? For 3 cycles they simply watched, made no aggressive moves, issued no threats, continued their normal activities as if the Dren fleet was a mild inconvenience. Then, on the 4th cycle, every single Dren ship received the same message simultaneously, in every Dren dialect, in the personal voice pattern of the Dren High Admiral's deceased mother.
Valen felt something cold move through him. What did the message say? We know you're afraid, so are we. Let's talk. Marith's secondary arms wrapped around herself in an unconscious gesture of unease. The Dren withdrew the fleet. They've been trading partners ever since. They've never spoken publicly about what was discussed in those talks, but the High Admiral reportedly never threatened another species again. He took up poetry instead, wrote extensively about the impermanence of power. For a long moment, neither spoke. The stars continued their eternal drift outside the viewport.
What are we walking into, Marith?
I don't know, First Consul. Her honesty was both refreshing and terrifying. I don't think anyone does. They were 3 cycles from Earth when the Hollow found them. Valen was in what passed for a command center on a refugee ship, a cramped space filled with salvaged consoles and the persistent smell of recycled air, when the sensor officer's voice cut through the quiet like a blade. Console. Contact. Bearing 47, Mark 12. Hollow signature. The words drained the color from every face in the room. Valen felt his hearts, all 3 of them, stutter in his chest. Not here. Not now. Not when they were so close. How many? He asked, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. Single vessel. Harvester class. The sensor officer's hands trembled over his console. They've seen us. They're changing course to intercept. A harvester. Not the worst of the Hollow's fleet, but more than enough to annihilate their unarmed refugee convoy. Valen had seen what harvesters did to ships, to stations, to worlds. He had watched from a distance as the Hollow's vessels tore through the Elthrani Second Fleet like paper, their weapons converting matter directly into energy, their crews, if they could be called crews, utterly silent on all frequencies. No demands, no communication. Just death, arriving with the inevitability of entropy.
Time to intercept?
7 hours, Consul. 7 hours. 7 hours until everything he'd fought to preserve, every survivor they'd managed to gather, every child sleeping in stasis with dreams of a future they would never see, all of it would end in silence and fire. Send a distress signal, Valen said quietly. Wide band, all frequencies. Include our position, our situation, and our passenger manifest.
Consul. The only ones who might receive it in time would be...
The humans, yes. Valen straightened, forcing his exhausted body into something resembling dignity. Send it. He did not let himself hope. Hope was a luxury he had abandoned when the Hollow took the home world. But as the signal went out into the void, he permitted himself one small thought. If this was where his people's story ended, at least someone would know. Someone would remember that the Elthrani had existed, that they had tried to survive,
that in the end they had reached out across the stars to strangers and asked for help.
That would have to be enough. The response came 47 minutes later.
Valen was staring at the tactical display, watching the hollow harvester creep closer with the patience of a predator that knew its prey had nowhere to run, when the communications officer suddenly stiffened.
"Council, we're receiving a transmission. Human origin."
Every eye in the room turned. Valen's throat tightened. "Put it through."
The voice that filled the command center was calm, unhurried, and spoke flawless Aelthrani with only the slightest accent.
Aelthrani Vessel Eternal Whisper. This is Commander Sarah Chen of the United Earth Vessel Resolute. We've received your distress signal and are en route to your position. Estimated arrival time 3 hours 42 minutes. Please maintain current heading and speed. We'll handle the rest.
The message ended. Silence fell over the command center like a physical weight. 3 hours? Someone whispered. They're 3 hours away? That's impossible, the navigation officer said, her voice cracking. The nearest human territory is 11 light years from here. Even with their best drives, they couldn't.
They were already moving, Valen said slowly, the realization settling into him with a strange, cold weight. Before we sent the signal. They were already coming.
But how could they know?
They didn't know. They guessed. They saw the trajectory of our refugee convoy, calculated where we'd be, and positioned themselves to intercept. He paused, something shifting in his understanding. They've been watching us, tracking our movements, probably since we entered this sector. Myrith appeared at his side, her face pale. If they knew we were coming, why didn't they contact us sooner?
Valen had no answer. Or rather, he had several, and none of them were comforting.
The Resolute arrived in 3 hours and 38 minutes, 4 minutes ahead of schedule.
Valen watched it emerge from faster-than-light transit on the main display, and for a moment he didn't understand what he was seeing. Human vessels, according to the old archives, were supposed to be crude things, functional but graceless, all sharp angles and exposed systems, and the desperate practicality of a young species reaching for the stars with whatever tools they could cobble together.
The Resolute was none of those things.
It was beautiful in a way that made his chest ache, a long, elegant shape that seemed to flow rather than fly, its hull a deep blue-gray that caught the starlight like water. There were no visible weapons, no aggressive protrusions, nothing that spoke of war. It looked almost organic, almost alive, and it moved through space with a confidence that suggested it belonged there more than the stars themselves.
By the ancestors, someone breathed behind him. The communications officer's voice was unsteady. They're hailing us, Consul. On screen, the display flickered, and Valen found himself looking at a human face for the first time in his long life. Commander Sarah Chen was not what he had expected, though in fairness, he wasn't sure what he had expected. She appeared to be in middle age by human standards, with dark hair pulled back from a face that was neither particularly striking nor particularly plain. Her eyes were the color of deep space, and they regarded him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Calm, certainly.
Patient, perhaps, but there was something else there, something that moved in the depths like a current beneath still water.
First Consul Valen Corthaxis, she said. Her pronunciation of his name was surprisingly accurate. I'm Commander Chen. I understand you have a problem.
He almost laughed at the understatement. A hollow harvester is 4 hours from turning my convoy into expanding clouds of particles. I would characterize that as more than a problem, Commander.
The barest hint of a smile touched her lips. Fair point. I've reviewed your situation.
7,000 survivors, no weapons, no defensive capability, no functioning faster-than-light drive. Is that accurate?
It is. And the hollow vessel, it's definitely a harvester class, not a scout or a seeder?
Definitely a harvester. We've had extensive experience identifying their ship classes. The words came out more bitter than he intended, carrying the weight of 100 dead worlds.
Commander Chen nodded slowly, as if confirming something she'd already suspected. We've been tracking hollow movements in this region for the past 18 months. This particular vessel has destroyed 11 convoy ships and 2 space stations. It never deviates from its pattern. Approach, destroy, move on. No communication, no survivors.
You've been tracking them for 18 months? Valen felt something cold move through him. You knew they were here? You knew they were hunting refugees?
Yes.
And you did nothing? Commander Chen's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. Something that might have been sorrow or might have been steel. We couldn't act without revealing ourselves. The Hollow didn't know we existed, didn't know what we were capable of. That information had value, strategic value.
Strategic value. Valen's voice was hollow. 11 convoys, thousands of lives, and you were calculating strategic value?
Yes. There was no apology in her voice, no defensiveness, just a simple acknowledgement of truth. That's exactly what we were doing. Because when we finally moved against the Hollow, we wanted to win. Not just this battle, not just this sector, we wanted to win the war. And sometimes that means making choices that haunt you.
She paused, and for just a moment, Valen saw something beneath the calm. A flash of pain, quickly suppressed, that spoke of losses he couldn't imagine.
I won't pretend it was the right choice, Chen continued quietly. I won't pretend I sleep well at night. But I will tell you this, First Consul. Your convoy is the last one the Hollow will ever destroy. That much I can promise you. Valen wanted to rage at her, wanted to condemn her cold calculation and strategic patience while his people died. But he had made similar choices himself in the early days of the collapse. He had ordered retreats that left millions behind. He had sealed gates knowing that entire worlds waited on the other side for rescue that would never come. He had calculated and counted and done the mathematics of survival while everything he loved burned.
How? He finally asked. How can you promise that?
Commander Chen smiled. A real smile this time. Warm and sad and strangely terrible. Stay on this channel, First Consul. I think you'll want to see what comes next.
The Hollow Harvester arrived precisely on schedule, a vast angular shape that seemed to swallow light rather than reflect it. It was larger than the Resolute by an order of magnitude, its hull studded with weapons that had turned worlds to ash, its presence radiating the cold certainty of death. Valen had seen these vessels before, from the safety of observation platforms hundreds of light-years away, and even at that distance they had filled him with a primal dread. Now, watching one approach his defenseless convoy with nothing between them but a single human ship, he felt something beyond fear. He felt the weight of ending, the finality of a story reaching its last page.
On the display, the Resolute drifted between the convoy and the approaching nightmare. It looked absurdly small, a minnow positioning itself before a whale. "Commander Chen," Valen heard himself say, "I appreciate your courage, but this is suicide. Your vessel cannot possibly—"
First Consul, her voice was gentle but firm, I asked you to watch. Please, watch. The Hollow Harvester came on, silent and inexorable.
At 50,000 kilometers, it began powering its weapons. Valen could see the energy signatures spiking on his tactical display, the terrible mathematics of annihilation being calculated in alien computers.
The Resolute did not move.
At 30,000 kilometers, the Harvester's weapons reached full charge. On Valen's display, targeting solutions flickered. The Convoy, the Resolute, trajectories of destruction plotted with mechanical precision. The Resolute still did not move. At 15,000 kilometers, the Harvester fired. Valen didn't see what happened next. Not really. The sensors on the Eternal Whisper were too slow, too primitive to capture it. One moment, beams of energy that could core a planet were lancing toward the Resolute. The next moment, they were gone. Not deflected, not absorbed, simply gone, as if they had never existed.
It didn't accelerate in any conventional sense. It simply flowed, like light through water, like thought through neurons. One moment it was between the convoy and the Harvester. The next moment it was beside the Harvester, close enough to touch, its hull sliding past those terrible weapons as if they were no more threatening than garden sculptures. The Harvester tried to turn, tried to bring its weapons to bear on this impossible target. It was like watching a mountain try to swat a hummingbird. By the time its guns had tracked, the Resolute was somewhere else, touching the Harvester's hull with what looked almost like gentleness.
And where it touched, the Harvester died.
Not exploded. That would have been comprehensible, expected, the normal violence of space combat. Instead, the Harvester simply stopped. Sections of its hull went dark, weapons powered down mid-charge, engines fell silent. It was like watching a living thing suffer a stroke, its systems shutting down in a cascade of failure that spread from the points of contact like frost spreading across glass.
In less than 30 seconds, the vessel that had destroyed 11 convoys, 2 stations, and hundreds of thousands of lives was nothing but a drifting hulk, as dead and silent as the void itself. The Resolute returned to its position between the convoy and the corpse of its enemy, serene and unhurried, as if it had done nothing more strenuous than take a brief walk.
Commander Chen's voice came over the channel, as calm as it had been throughout. Threat neutralized, First Consul. You're safe to continue your journey. We'll escort you the rest of the way to Earth.
Valen stood in the command center of his refugee ship, surrounded by the stunned silence of his crew, and felt something shift in his understanding of the universe. It was not a pleasant feeling. It was the sensation of looking up at the night sky and realizing for the first time just how small you truly were.
Commander Chen, he finally managed. What did you do to that ship? There was a pause before she answered, and when she did, her voice carried a weight that he was only beginning to understand.
We asked it to stop, First Consul, and it did.
The journey to Earth took 7 days at the convoy's maximum safe speed. The Resolute could have made the trip in hours, perhaps minutes. Valen was beginning to realize that his understanding of human capabilities was catastrophically incomplete. But Commander Chen matched their pace without complaint, a patient shepherd guiding frightened sheep through the darkness. On the 2nd day, she invited him aboard her ship. The shuttle that came for him was small, sleek, and operated by a young human named Marcus, who smiled easily and spoke passable Elthrani. He chatted about inconsequential things during the short trip, the weather on Earth, the quality of Elthrani music, his grandmother's recipe for something called macaroni and cheese, and Valen found himself oddly charmed despite his lingering unease. The interior of the Resolute was nothing like he expected.
The old archives had described human vessels as cramped, utilitarian spaces filled with the smell of recycled air and the constant hum of overtaxed systems. This was comfortable. The corridors were wide, the lighting warm, the air fresh with traces of green growing things. He passed a room where crew members were exercising to rhythmic music. Another where a group was gathered around a table playing some kind of game with cards and chips while laughing loudly.
"It doesn't look like a warship," he said to Marcus.
The young man's smile flickered, just for a moment. "It's home, sir. For a lot of us, it's been home for years. We try to make it feel that way."
"But it is a warship. What I saw."
"It's home," Marcus repeated quietly. "It just happens to also be very, very good at keeping us safe." Commander Chen was waiting for him in what she called the observation lounge, a curved room with a transparent ceiling that showed the stars in all their terrible glory. She was seated at a small table with 2 cups of something steaming, and she gestured for him to join her. "Tea," she said, pushing 1 cup toward him. "It's a human tradition. We drink it when we have difficult conversations." Valen settled into the chair across from her, his 4 eyes taking in the room, the stars, the impossible woman before him. "I have many questions."
"I imagine you do. I'll answer what I can."
"The Hollow, what do you know about them?" Chen's expression remained neutral, but her hands tightened almost imperceptibly around her cup. "More than we'd like, less than we need. They appeared approximately 40 standard years ago, emerging from a region of space we call the Quiet Zone, an area where no signals, no life, no anything had ever been detected. They don't communicate, they don't negotiate, they don't seem to want anything except the destruction of everything they encounter."
"We know this," Valen said, unable to keep the edge from his voice. "We've been fighting them for 40 cycles. We've lost everything fighting them."
"I know." Her voice was soft. "We've been watching." "You've been watching?" The words came out flat, cold, while the Hollow consumed world after world, while 12 billion Aelthrani died, while the gates fell and the fleets burned and everything we built over 10,000 cycles was reduced to ash. You were watching.
"Yes."
"Why?" The question tore out of him, carrying centuries of pain. "Why didn't you help?"
Commander Chen set down her cup. For a long moment she simply looked at him, and in her dark eyes he saw something vast and sad and patient. "Because we needed to understand them first," she said. "Because we needed to be certain. Because every war we've ever fought, we've won. But the cost of winning has always been terrible, and we didn't know if we could afford this one." She paused. "And because, First Consul, your people never asked."
Never asked for help, for aid, for alliance. In 40 years of war against an enemy that was destroying you, not once did the Aelthrani hegemony reach out to humanity. We were too primitive, weren't we? Too young, too savage, too dangerous. You fought alone because you couldn't imagine that we might be worth asking.
The accusation hung in the air between them, sharp and true. Valen wanted to deny it, to explain the complexities of Aelthrani politics and the legacy of isolation that had shaped his people's approach to other species. But the excuses felt hollow, even in his own mind. "We were proud," he finally admitted. "Too proud." Yes, there was no judgment in her voice, only acknowledgement. "But you're here now. And now you're asking." "I'm begging," Valen corrected her quietly. "There's nothing left to be proud about. 7,000 survivors out of 12 billion. A handful of ships, most of them held together with hope and desperation. The Hollow have taken everything else. So yes, Commander, I am begging. for sanctuary, for mercy, for anything you can give."
Commander Chen stood and walked to the transparent ceiling, looking up at the stars. The light caught her face in profile, and for a moment she looked almost statuesque, a figure carved from shadow and starlight. "Tell me about your homeworld," she said. "Not the geography or the population or the resources. Tell me what it felt like. Tell me what you loved about it."
The question caught him off guard. Why?
Because I'm trying to understand what we'd be fighting for, what we'd be asking our people to die for. We don't go to war for abstractions, First Consul. We go to war for homes, for families, for the small, precious things that make life worth living. Tell me about yours."
Valen closed his eyes. The memories came reluctantly at first, then in a flood. The violet dawns over the crystal mountains, the way the light played through the canopy of the great forest, the sound of his daughter's laughter echoing through the halls of his family estate, the smell of rain on summer evenings, the taste of fruit picked fresh from the garden.
"There was a lake," he heard himself say, "near the house where I grew up. Every evening, the bioluminescent creatures that lived in its depths would rise to the surface, and the whole lake would glow like captured starlight. My mother used to take me there to watch them. She said they were the dreams of the planet, rising up to greet the night."
His voice broke slightly. The hollow evaporated that lake in the first hour of their assault. The entire hemisphere was glass by the end of the day.
When he opened his eyes, Commander Chen was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "I had a sister," she said quietly. "Her name was Michelle. She was 10 years older than me, practically raised me after our parents died. She was the one who convinced me to join the fleet, said I had a gift for staying calm when everything was falling apart." A pause. "She died 3 years ago. Hollow raid on a colony ship we were supposed to be protecting. We got there 4 minutes too late." Valen stared at her. I didn't know. I'm sorry." 4,700 people were on that ship. I knew most of them by name. I'd celebrated their children's birthdays, attended their weddings, helped them plant gardens on a world they'd never get to see. Chen's voice remained steady, but her hands had curled into fists at her sides. 4 minutes. If we'd been 4 minutes faster, they'd all still be alive. "Commander, I don't tell you this to compare our losses, First Consul. Yours are incomparably greater. I tell you so you understand. We know what you're feeling. We know the weight of the dead you carry. And we know what it's like to watch something precious burn while you stand helpless, calculating strategic value because you're not ready yet, you're not strong enough yet. And if you act too soon, you'll lose everything." She turned to face him fully, and in her eyes he saw something that hadn't been there before, a fire, carefully banked but burning hot and bright. "We're ready now, First Consul. We've been ready for 18 months. We were just waiting for a reason to stop watching and start acting."
A reason?
You, your convoy, 7,000 survivors who had nowhere else to go, who swallowed their pride and reached out to strangers. That was the reason. She smiled, and there was something fierce in it. Earth doesn't abandon those who ask for help. We never have. It's not in our nature. Valen felt something shift in his chest. Not hope, not yet, but something adjacent to it. Something fragile and wounded that had been silent for so long it had forgotten how to speak.
What are you saying, Commander?
I'm saying that your people aren't refugees anymore, First Consul. You're allies. And the Hollow have no idea what they've awakened. Earth was smaller than he expected. That was his first thought
as the convoy approached the blue-green marble that humanity called home. It was so small, so fragile-looking, a single precious jewel hanging in the vast darkness of space. Valen had seen gas giants that dwarfed it, stations that matched its diameter, weapons that could crack it like an egg.
And yet, something about it made his breath catch in his chest.
Beautiful, isn't she? Commander Chen's voice came through the communication channel, warm with affection. Doesn't look like much, I know, but that little ball of rock and water has been through hell and back. Ice ages, asteroid impacts, mass extinctions, and every single time life found a way to come back. Stubborn little planet.
The convoy passed through Earth's orbital defense perimeter, and Valen's tactical officer made a small, strangled sound.
Console. The defensive installations. I'm reading.
How many?
A long pause. All of them, sir. I'm reading all of them.
Valen looked at the tactical display and felt the blood drain from his face. The space around Earth was crowded with structures, not the crude defensive platforms he'd expected, but sleek, organic shapes that seemed to pulse with quiet power. Thousands of them, tens of thousands, arranged in overlapping layers that would require any attacker to fight through an impossible gauntlet of death before reaching the planet below.
And ships? The tactical officer's voice was barely a whisper. I stopped counting at 40,000.
40,000 ships. The Elthrani hegemony at its height had fielded perhaps 8,000. The entire combined fleet of the Galactic Council had numbered barely 12,000. And here was humanity, the primitive species they had dismissed and quarantined and ignored, with a naval force that dwarfed anything he had ever imagined.
How? The word escaped him before he could stop it.
Commander Chen's answer was gentle, almost apologetic. We've had time to prepare, First Consul, and we've always been very good at building things. The convoy was guided to a massive station in high orbit, a structure that looked like a flower carved from crystal, its petals spreading wide to embrace the arriving ships. Valen watched as refugees were transferred to the station's medical facilities, as children were carried gently from stasis pods by human caregivers who sang soft songs in languages he didn't understand, as the wounded and the dying were tended with a care that seemed almost reverent. He was walking through the station's corridors, still dazed, when he passed a window overlooking one of the habitat sections. He stopped, transfixed by what he saw. It was a garden. A vast, impossible garden, stretching as far as he could see. Trees and flowers and flowing water, paths winding through green spaces where humans and other species walked together. Children playing on grass under an artificial sky that perfectly mimicked Earth's atmosphere. He saw Elthrani there, survivors from previous convoys he hadn't even known about, tending plants and talking with human neighbors and simply living. A small human child, no more than 4 or 5 years old, was sitting in the lap of an elderly Elthrani woman, listening with rapt attention as she told a story. Nearby, a group of human and Elthrani teenagers were playing some kind of ball game, their laughter echoing through the space without a trace of the tension or fear that Valen would have expected.
"We've had 3 convoys before yours," Commander Chen said, appearing beside him. "About 12,000 survivors in total. They've been settling in well."
"You never mentioned this."
"You never asked." She watched the garden alongside him, her expression soft. "We built this section specifically for your people, used Elthrani botanical databases to recreate some of your native plants. Not perfectly, but we're learning. It seemed important that they have something familiar, something to remind them of home."
Valen's vision blurred. He blinked rapidly, but the tears came anyway, the first he had shed since the homeworld fell.
"Why?"
he asked, his voice cracking. "Why do this? We're strangers. We're the people who quarantined you, who dismissed you, who left you to develop in isolation because we thought you were dangerous."
"You were right about that," Chen said quietly. "We are dangerous, but not to you. Never to you."
"I don't understand." She turned to face him, and in her eyes he saw something ancient, something forged in fire and loss and the long, hard struggle for survival.
"Let me tell you about my species, First Consul. About what we are and how we got here."
"We're not an old civilization. Compared to you, we're barely children. 200 years ago, we were still killing each other over religion and resources and ideology. 100 years ago, we almost destroyed ourselves, not once, but several times. We've had world wars and genocides and famines and plagues. We've done terrible things to each other, things that would make the Hollow look humane by comparison.
But we survived. Every single time we survived. Not because we were special, not because we were chosen, but because we refused to stop trying. We fought and bled and died and got back up and tried again. We built and lost and rebuilt. We made mistakes and learned from them, sometimes. And slowly, painfully, we got better."
She gestured at the garden below, at the children playing, at the elders tending their plants.
"This is what we learned. That the universe doesn't care about us, that there's no divine plan, no cosmic purpose, no guarantee that anything we build will last. But that doesn't mean we stop building. It doesn't mean we stop caring. If anything, it means we care more, because we know how rare and precious and fragile life is, because we know that tomorrow isn't promised to anyone."
"The Hollow destroyed everything we built," Valen said. 10,000 years of civilization, and they reduced it to ash in 40. "I know." Chen's voice was gentle but firm. "And we're going to help you build it again. But first, we're going to end the Hollow. Not defeat them, not push them back, not buy time with treaties and negotiations. End them. Forever." Valen stared at her. "You sound very confident."
"I am. The Hollow have destroyed every fleet sent against them. They've consumed hundreds of worlds.
They're a problem," Chen interrupted quietly. "And we're very, very good at solving problems."
Over the following days, Valen learned things about humanity that no Aelthrani archive had ever recorded.
He learned that they had developed faster-than-light travel not through gradual research and careful advancement, but through a desperate all-or-nothing gamble during what they called the Last Crisis, when their planet was dying and they needed to reach the stars or perish. They had built their first interstellar ships from salvaged satellites and repurposed nuclear weapons, crewed by volunteers who knew they might never return.
He learned that their first contact with alien life had not been with the Velothi or the Dren, but with a species called the Cthar, a predatory race that had viewed humans as a convenient source of food. The Cthar had landed on Earth expecting easy prey.
6 months later, the surviving Cathar had surrendered unconditionally and pleaded for mercy. Their invasion fleet turned to debris, their homeworld surrounded by human vessels that had learned to build warships by reverse engineering captured Cathar technology.
"We offered them a choice," Commander Chen explained during one of their conversations. "Become our allies or become our enemies. They chose wisely. 3 generations later, we're practically family." He learned that humans had a concept they called paying it forward, the idea that kindness received should be repaid not to the giver, but to others in need. It explained, partially, why they were helping the Aelthrani survivors.
Somewhere in their past, someone had shown humanity mercy when they needed it, and they were repaying that debt by offering mercy to others.
He learned that they kept detailed records of every species they had ever encountered, not just political structures and military capabilities, but art and music and literature and cuisine. They studied other cultures with an intensity that bordered on obsession, not to exploit weaknesses, but to understand differences, to find common ground, to build bridges across the vast gulfs between species.
And he learned that they had been planning for the Hollow since the first reports reached them 40 years ago.
"We knew this day would come," Admiral Zhang Wei told him during a briefing in the Orbital Command Center. Zhang was an older human, his hair silver and his face lined with decades of command, but his eyes were sharp as laser cutters. "We didn't know the specifics, who would survive, who would fall, how the dominoes would tumble, but we knew that eventually someone would reach out, someone would ask for help, and when they did, we would be ready."
Ready for what, exactly? Zhang smiled, a cold smile, the smile of a predator. Would you like to see? The war room was vast, a hemisphere of screens and holographic displays showing the entire galaxy in real time. Valen had seen command centers before. He had stood in the war room of the Elthrani Supreme Command during the height of the hegemony's power. This was nothing like that. Every star system was marked. Every known hollow position was tracked. Fleet movements, supply lines, communication networks, everything was visible, updated constantly by what Zhang called their sensor web, a network of hidden probes and listening posts that spanned the entire known galaxy.
"We've been watching them for 40 years, Zhang said, gesturing at the display, "learning their patterns, their tactics, their weaknesses. They're not invincible, First Consul. They're not gods. They're machines. Very advanced, very dangerous machines, but machines nonetheless. And machines can be broken."
Our scientists believed they were some kind of artificial intelligence, Valen said. Perhaps a weapon system that escaped its creator's control. That's part of it. But they're more than that. Zhang zoomed in on a region of space marked in red, the quiet zone, where the Hollow had first emerged. They're a cleanup system, a sterilization protocol left behind by a species that existed billions of years ago. Their purpose is simple. Eliminate any civilization that develops faster-than-light technology before it can spread beyond a certain point. Valen felt ice in his veins. A galactic immune system? Something like that. The species that created them believed that interstellar civilizations were dangerous, that they would inevitably conflict, compete for resources, eventually destroy the galaxy in a war of all against all. So they designed the Hollow to prevent that, to prune any civilization that reached too far, too fast. But why activate now? Interstellar civilizations have existed for millennia.
Because something triggered them 40 years ago. Some threshold was crossed. Some signal was detected. We're not entirely sure what it was. Zhang's voice dropped slightly. But we have a theory. He pulled up another display, a timeline showing the expansion of human space over the past 2 centuries. At a certain point, approximately 42 years ago, the expansion suddenly accelerated, new colonies appearing at an exponential rate. "We think we triggered them," Zhang said quietly. "Our expansion rate, our technological development, our enthusiasm. We were growing too fast, becoming too powerful too quickly. The Hollows woke up to deal with us and found a galaxy full of targets they'd missed."
Valen stared at the timeline. "You're saying the Hollow are here because of you?"
Possibly. We can't be certain. Zhang met his eyes steadily. But if we're responsible for waking them, then we're responsible for putting them back to sleep. Permanently.
And you have a plan for that?
Zong's cold smile returned. We have more than a plan, First Consul. We have a fleet. He pressed a control, and the holographic display changed. What Valen saw made his 3 hearts stop.
Ships. Thousands upon thousands of ships gathered in a region of space far beyond any known territory. Not the 40,000 he had seen in Earth orbit. Those were merely the home defense fleet. This was something else entirely.
This was an armada.
217,000 vessels, Zong said softly, constructed in secret over the past 3 decades, crewed by volunteers who knew they might not return, armed with weapons we've never used, never tested in actual combat, because we were waiting for the right moment.
He zoomed in on a ship at the center of the formation, a massive structure that dwarfed even the largest hollow harvester, its hull covered in strange geometries that seemed to shift and flow even in the static image.
That's the Prometheus, our flagship. It carries a weapon based on the same technology we used against the harvester that threatened your convoy, but scaled up by a factor of several million. We call it the Silence. 1 shot can disable every hollow vessel within a light year.
Valen's voice was barely a whisper. Why didn't you use this before? You could have saved...
We could have saved some, Zhang agreed, but not all. The hollow is spread across 1,000 light years. If we moved too soon, showed our hand before we were ready, they would have adapted. They would have developed countermeasures. They would have concentrated their forces before we could destroy them.
So you waited. You let billions die. And you waited.
Yes. There was no defense in Zhang's voice, no excuse. We made a choice. The hardest choice our species has ever made. And now we live with it. We'll live with it forever.
He turned to face Valen fully, and in his eyes was something that might have been guilt, might have been determination, might have been both.
But the waiting is over. The fleet launches in 72 hours, and when it does, the Hollow will learn what happens when humanity stops watching and starts fighting.
Valen watched the fleet depart from an observation platform on the orbital station. He had requested permission to accompany them, demanded it, actually, invoking his position as First Consul of a dying people who deserved to see their destroyers destroyed. Commander Chen had gently refused.
"You're too important," she had said. "Your people need you here, helping them rebuild. And honestly, what's about to happen? You don't need to see it. Nobody does."
What is about to happen? She had been silent for a long moment before answering. The Hollow have been destroying civilizations for 40 years. They've grown accustomed to winning. They've never faced an enemy that truly threatened them, truly pushed them, truly made them afraid. She paused. They're about to learn what fear feels like, and I don't think anyone should have to watch that. Not even their victims. So Valen watched from the observation platform as 200,000 ships vanished into faster-than-light transit, one by one, a cascade of light that took nearly an hour to complete. He watched until the last ship disappeared, and then he remained there, staring at empty space, waiting.
The reports began coming in 3 days later.
The first engagement was at a system called Vertex 7, a former Aelthrani colony that the Hollow had converted into a staging ground. A Hollow fleet of approximately 4,000 vessels had been gathered there, preparing for a push into the core territories of what had once been the hegemony.
The human fleet arrived in a sphere of light that blanketed the system. The Hollow, for the first time in their existence, were surrounded.
Valen watched the sensor recordings with a mixture of awe and horror. The Hollow fought. Of course they fought. They were designed for nothing else. But their weapons passed through human shields like water through a sieve. Their vessels, so terrifying in every previous engagement, seemed clumsy and slow against human ships that moved like thoughts, like dreams, like the vengeance of 10,000 dead worlds given form. The engagement lasted 47 minutes. At the end of it, 4,000 hollow vessels were silent, drifting hulks, and humanity had lost 3 ships.
3 ships.
The news spread through the refugee population like fire. For the first time since the collapse began, Valen heard Aelthrani laughing. He heard children playing without fear. He heard elders praying, not for survival, but for victory.
The second engagement was at the Ring of Sorrows, a system where the Hollow had constructed one of their largest manufacturing facilities, churning out new harvesters and seeders and worse things at a rate that had seemed impossible to match. The human fleet arrived with the Prometheus at its center, and when the flagship's weapon fired, every single Hollow vessel within a light year simply stopped. Their manufacturing facilities fell silent, their weapons powered down.
Their malevolent purpose simply ended.
Admiral Zhang's voice echoed through the command channels, picked up by the sensor buoys that humanity had scattered throughout the war zone. This is the United Earth Fleet to any surviving resistance forces. The Ring of Sorrows is neutralized. Repeat, the ring is neutralized. Hold position and prepare for extraction.
Resistance forces. Valen hadn't even known there were Aelthrani still fighting. Scattered remnants, hidden in asteroid belts and forgotten stations, waging a hopeless guerrilla war against an enemy that outnumbered them 1,000 to 1. But now they emerged from hiding, their broken ships limping toward the human fleet, their crews weeping with relief at the sight of an enemy finally falling.
The third engagement, the fourth, the fifth. Each report brought news of victory, of Hollow forces destroyed, of territory reclaimed. The humans didn't just defeat the enemy, they dismantled them, took apart their fleet piece by piece with a precision that spoke of decades of planning and preparation. And then came the final push.
The Quiet Zone. The place where the Hollow had been born or awakened or emerged, the empty region of space that had spawned the nightmare that consumed a galaxy. The human fleet gathered at its edge, 200,000 vessels forming a sphere around the darkness, and for a moment, everything was still.
Valen watched the sensor feed with every surviving Aelthrani packed into viewing halls across the orbital station, holding their breath, waiting for something they couldn't name. Admiral Zhang's voice came through the feed, calm and clear. All vessels, this is the flagship. We are about to enter the Quiet Zone. Whatever we find in there, whatever made the Hollow, whatever has been sleeping in the darkness for billions of years, we are going to wake it up, and then we are going to put it to sleep forever.
A pause. Then, almost gently,
For those who've fallen, for those who survive, for a future where our children never have to fear the dark. Forward. The fleet moved as one. 200,000 vessels crossed the threshold into the Quiet Zone, their lights blazing against the endless dark, and for a moment, just a moment, it was like watching a galaxy of stars being born.
and then the feed went dead.
17 days. 17 days of silence, of waiting, of prayers offered to gods long forgotten. 17 days of staring at blank screens and counting seconds and trying not to imagine what might be happening in the darkness.
Valen did not sleep, could not sleep. He stood at the observation platform where he had watched the fleet depart, staring at the stars, and wondered if this was how his species ended, not with the fire of the hollow, but with the silence of hope extinguished. On the 18th day, the signals returned.
Not a trickle, not a gradual restoration, a flood. Every sensor buoy, every communication relay, every monitoring station across the galaxy suddenly lit up with data. And at the center of it all, emerging from the quiet zone like a sunrise after an endless night, came the fleet.
Not 200,000 ships, 167,000. The losses had been real, terrible, a price paid in blood and steel for the victory they brought. But they had won. Admiral Zhang's voice came through every speaker on the orbital station, weary and rough, but carrying a weight that made Valen's hearts stop.
This is Admiral Zhang Wei of the United Earth Fleet. The war is over. The Hollow are neutralized. The entity that created them, we found it. An artificial intelligence complex the size of a small planet, sleeping for 3 billion years, waiting to complete its purpose. It's not sleeping anymore. It will never wake again. A pause, filled with the soft crackle of stellar interference. To all species, all survivors, all those who have been hiding and fighting and praying for an end, your prayers are answered. The nightmare is over. The galaxy is free. Another pause, longer this time. We have paid a terrible price for this victory. 33,000 of our ships will not return. Their crews gave everything so that others might live. We will remember them. We will honor them. And we will build a future worthy of their sacrifice. And then, almost as an afterthought, almost too quiet to hear, Earth sends its regards. The celebration lasted for weeks. Across the galaxy, on stations and colonies and refugee vessels, species that had been strangers learned to laugh together, to weep together, to raise voices in songs of joy that had been silent for far too long. The hollow were gone. The darkness had passed. For the first time in 40 years, there was tomorrow. Valen did not celebrate.
He found a quiet corner of the orbital station, a small garden where Althrani plants were beginning to bloom under the patient care of human botanists, and he sat beneath a tree that reminded him of home. His eyes were dry, he had no more tears to give, but his hearts were heavy with something he couldn't name. Commander Chen found him there. She sat beside him without speaking, her presence a quiet comfort in the artificial twilight. For a long time, neither of them said anything. The sounds of celebration echoed distantly, muffled by walls and distance, a reminder of joy that felt somehow inaccessible. "You're not celebrating," she finally said. "Neither are you." A small smile touched her lips. "I've been at this for too long. I've learned that victory always comes with a price, and the price always comes due eventually. Right now, I'm just tired." Tired. Valen turned the word over in his mind. "Yes, I think I understand tired." Silence fell between them again, comfortable and sad. 33,000 ships, Valen said quietly. How many crew per ship? Average of 43. 1.4 million people dead. Yes.
For us, for strangers, for species that dismissed you and ignored you and left you to develop in quarantine because we were afraid of what you might become.
Yes,
Valen closed his eyes. Why? I've asked this before, but I still don't understand. Why would you sacrifice so much for people who showed you nothing but contempt?
Chen was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer than he had ever heard it.
Do you know what the hardest thing about being human is?
He shook his head. It's not the dying. We're actually quite good at dying. We've had a lot of practice. It's not the suffering, or the loss, or the endless struggle just to keep going when everything seems hopeless. Those are hard, but we can handle hard. She looked up at the artificial sky, where simulated stars were beginning to appear.
The hardest thing is knowing that the universe is vast and cold and indifferent, knowing that our lives are brief flickers in an infinite darkness, knowing that nothing we build will last forever, that everything we love will eventually end, that there is no cosmic purpose, no divine plan, no guarantee that our existence means anything at all.
That sounds bleak. It is. It's the bleakest thing imaginable. But here's the secret, First Consul. The secret that took us 10,000 years and more wars than we can count to understand. She turned to face him, and in her eyes was something that looked almost like peace. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter?
The universe doesn't care about us. So what? We care about us. We care about each other. We care about the little moments of beauty and connection and love that make life worth living, not because they're eternal, but because they're precious, not because they last, but because they matter.
She reached out and placed her hand on his arm, a gesture of connection, of comfort, of shared humanity. We didn't fight the Hollow for strategic advantage, or territorial gain, or any of the reasons that have driven wars throughout history. We fought because it was right, because someone had to, because when we looked at the darkness consuming everything, we couldn't just watch. Not anymore.
Even at the cost of over 1 million of your own people?
They knew the stakes. They volunteered. Every single one of them knew they might not come back, and they went anyway. Her voice cracked slightly. That's who we are, First Consul. That's what humanity has become. We're not the primitive savages your archives described. We're not the dangerous species you quarantined. We're just people. People who've been through hell and come out the other side and decided that the only meaning our lives have is the meaning we give them.
Valen sat with that for a long moment. The weight of the words settled into him, finding resonance with something deep inside, something that had been silent since the home world fell, since everything he loved turned to ash.
My people used to have a saying, he said quietly. From before the hegemony, before we became what we became. The stars do not care who watches them, but they shine anyway. I had forgotten it, dismissed it as primitive philosophy.
Sounds like wisdom to me. Perhaps, he looked at her, really looked, seeing for the first time not a representative of an alien species, but a fellow survivor, a kindred spirit forged in fire. Perhaps we are not so different after all.
Perhaps not.
Chen smiled, and there was warmth in it, real warmth, the warmth of connection across the void. We never were, you know. The universe doesn't care about species or planets or civilizations. We're all just children of the same stars, trying to find our way in the dark.
From somewhere in the distance, a child's laughter echoed through the garden. An Elthrani child, playing with human friends, their voices blending in a sound that would have been unthinkable just months before.
What happens now? Valen asked.
Now we rebuild.
Your worlds, our worlds, everyone's worlds. It'll take generations, maybe centuries, but we have time. For the first time in 40 years, we have time.
And my people, what place do we have in this new galaxy you're building?
Chen stood, offering him a hand. Whatever place you want. You can rebuild the hegemony if that's what you choose. You can join the Commonwealth. Yes, that's what we're calling it, the Commonwealth of Worlds. You can go your own way entirely, chart your own course among the stars. We won't dictate your future.
But you could. With the power you've shown, you could rule the entire galaxy. No one could stop you.
No one could, Chen agreed. But we won't. That's not who we are. That's not who we want to be.
Valen took her hand and let her help him to his feet. His old body ached, exhausted by centuries of life and the recent trials, but something felt different, lighter, as if a burden he hadn't known he was carrying had finally been set down.
I think, he said slowly, that I have spent my whole life believing I understood the universe, the hierarchies of power, the mathematics of survival, the cold equations that govern the rise and fall of civilizations. I was certain that I knew how the story went.
And now? Now, I think I understand nothing. And somehow, that feels like wisdom.
Chen laughed, a real laugh, unguarded and warm. That's the human condition, First Consul. Welcome to it.
The galaxy held its breath for 40 years. 40 years of darkness, of destruction, of the slow extinction of everything that lived and loved and dreamed under the light of alien suns. 40 years of watching, waiting, hoping for a dawn that seemed ever more impossible.
And then Earth moved.
Not in fire, though fire was part of it. Not in rage, though rage was there, buried deep beneath centuries of discipline. Earth moved with purpose, with precision, with the terrible patience of a species that had learned to survive anything the universe could throw at it.
Earth moved, and the darkness trembled.
Valen understood now, as he had not understood before. Humanity was not remarkable because of their technology, though their technology was formidable. They were not remarkable because of their strength, though their strength was undeniable. They were remarkable because of something simpler, something older, something that no archive had ever thought to record.
They cared. In a universe of cold equations and survival calculus, they cared. They looked at strangers dying in the void and felt their pain. They looked at enemies who had dismissed them and felt not vengeance, but empathy. They looked at the darkness consuming everything and said simply, "No, not while we are here." It was not logical. It was not strategic. It was not the behavior of any species that had come before.
It was human. And in the end, that was what saved the galaxy. Not weapons or technology or brilliant strategy, though those played their parts. What saved the galaxy was a species that refused to accept that the darkness was inevitable, that refused to believe that survival meant letting others fall, that refused to watch and wait and calculate while everything burned. What saved the galaxy was a small blue marble, 3 billion years old, that had been through ice ages and mass extinctions and the long climb from pond scum to starships, and never, ever gave up. The stars did not care who watched them, but under those uncaring stars, on a planet that should have been too young and too small and too fragile to matter, a species had risen, that cared enough for all of them. The galaxy held its breath, and Earth moved. 5 years later, Valen stood on the surface of his home world for the first time since the collapse. The humans had helped them rebuild it, not to what it had been, but to what it could become. The crystal mountains still glittered in the violet dawn, though many of their peaks had been shattered by hollow weapons. The great forest was growing again, young trees rising from the ashes of the old, tended by Elthrani botanists and human volunteers working side by side. And the lake near his childhood home, the lake that had glowed with bioluminescent dreams, had been restored, its waters teeming with life that had been resurrected from genetic samples preserved in orbital archives. He walked slowly along the shore, his old joints aching, his heart full of something he had almost forgotten how to feel. A small human child was playing at the water's edge, one of the children from the mixed families that were becoming increasingly common, adopted by Elthrani parents who had lost their own children in the collapse. She looked up as he approached, her face bright with the uncomplicated joy of youth.
First Consul! First Consul! Look what I found! She held up a small creature, one of the bioluminescent organisms from the lake, blowing softly in her cupped hands.
"That's beautiful," he said, and meant it.
"My mama says these are the dreams of the planet," the child said seriously. "She says they rise up every night to greet the stars."
"She's right," Valen said, his voice thick with emotion. "That's exactly what they are."
The child gently released the creature back into the water and ran off to play, her laughter echoing across the lake. Valen watched her go and felt something break inside him, not a breaking of pain, but a breaking of walls, of barriers, of the armor he had worn for so long he had forgotten what it was protecting.
The stars were rising now, filling the violet sky with points of light. Somewhere out there, the human fleet was patrolling, keeping watch, ensuring that the darkness never returned. Somewhere out there, new colonies were being founded, new futures being born, new stories being written in the light of alien suns. And here, on the shore of a lake that had been destroyed and reborn, an old man stood watching the dreams of a planet rise to greet the night. Commander Chen found him there an hour later. She was older now, too, her hair streaked with gray, but her eyes were still dark and deep and full of something that might have been wisdom.
"It's beautiful," she said, watching the lights dance on the water.
"It is," he agreed.
"Thank you for all of it."
"You don't have to thank us."
"I know. That's why I'm thanking you." He turned to face her, and in his 4 eyes was something she had never seen before. Peace. "My people have a new saying now. We adopted it from you, actually, though we've made it our own. The universe doesn't care, so we will." Chen smiled, and in that smile was all the warmth of a species that had learned to love not despite the darkness, but because of it. "That," she said, "is the best thing I've heard in a long time." They stood together in silence, watching the lights rise from the water, watching the stars wheel overhead, watching the future unfold before them like a gift they had never expected to receive. The galaxy had held its breath for 40 years, and then Earth moved, and nothing would ever be the same again. In the distance, a child laughed. The lights danced on the water. The stars shone down with their ancient, indifferent light. And somewhere, in the hearts of every species that had survived the darkness, a new story was beginning. A story of hope, of cooperation, of the stubborn refusal to let the universe have the last word.
It was a human story. It was an Elthrani story. It was the story of every being who had ever looked up at the uncaring void and decided, against all evidence, that things could be better.
And it was only just beginning.